This is Sonic Ventures, a podcast celebrating the concept album format with Robert Goebel and Joël Tibbetts.
Sonic Ventures is an evolving series of discussions that explore concept albums from a variety of artists and genres. Our intent here is to have celebratory conversations of our personal experiences with selected works and the issues and themes surrounding concept albums.
Sometimes, we will be treading familiar waters concerning music interpretation and creation. Other times, we will venture into different places of thought, emotion, and expression. We invite you to join us on our sonic venture.
Hey everyone, Rob here, and welcome to Sonic Ventures Podcast Season 2, Episode 6. Today's episode discussion explores the band Ep.6 and their 1989 concept album, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. Joël and I sat down to record this discussion on Friday, July 7th, 2023, in the newly christened Backroom Studios located in the South Slopes of Burnaby, BC. Now, before I make any additional comments or we roll on the episode proper, I'd like to pause and get to a few housekeeping items. We're nearing the last few episodes of Season 2. There's going to be 8 in total, and both Joël and I would like to extend our thanks and gratitude to all our listeners. We've heard from some of you, and we're thrilled to know that there are people out there enjoying these discussions. With some of the access to stats and data that we have, we can see lots of return listeners, and it's super exciting to see those numbers grow and watch new cities and countries get added to the listener base. We have listeners in over 40 countries right now, which is simply amazing to both of us. So make sure you feel welcome to reach out to us if you'd like to share your thoughts and experiences with these albums. Our email address is sonicventurespodcast@gmail.com, and we have accounts on all the socials, including Instagram, Twitter, even the new one, Threads. You can hit us up on all those. We'd be happy to hear from you and happy to engage. We'd like to remind you that we do have a Patreon account that you can join and support the podcast for about the price of a cappuccino. We host all our bonus content on Patreon, including the Aftercast discussions, which are the discussions we record immediately following our regular episode discussion. Now, if you're curious about those, we've made some free to access, but they're developing into their own unique thing, and we found them very rewarding to do. I'd like to extend a special thanks to all our listeners in Germany, which after the US and Canada is our third largest listener base, accounting for over 10% of our audience. Europe accounts for 20%, so that 10% figure coming from Germany alone is super significant. Now, of course, it could be that we're just being listened to as a sleep aid over there, or some night shift hospital worker in Bavaria might be piping our podcast into a nursery full of sleeping babies as white noise. Now, we'll take it. The idea of being the podcast of choice for a bunch of sleeping babies would be an amazing accolade. But truly, to our listeners out of Germany, to all our listeners worldwide, we thank you. Now, getting back to Ep.6 and Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. This band is one of my favorite bands of all time, and I think that enthusiasm is evident in the conversation. And like a lot of our discussions, there's so many more doors we could have opened and explored here. But this album is all about the journey. It's a quest exploring spiritual and existential themes. But it's not a Kentucky tour where you get in the bus just to hit up the next cathedral or temple and check them off your list. Each venture, each footstep, each listen to the album is as unique as the last. And each trip or journey seems to reconfigure itself thematically with you within the story. You're both the audio witness and participant as you render and re-render the trip from somewhere deep in your mind. At least that's what's going on with me when I listen. Your mileage may vary. And as always, it was a pleasure to journey with Joël on this one. So let's get on with it. Let's let the episode do the talking. This is Ep.6, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, Sonic Ventures podcast discussion. Enjoy.
Hello, Rob.
Hey, Joël.
It's so nice to be speaking with you again.
Yeah, it's been many a day. Not really, but...
Yeah, I think this is the shortest period of time we've had between episodes.
Right.
Coming into this conversation.
We're just catching up to the original sort of season schedule that we had, adjusting for some life events and that sort of thing, but trying to keep generally within our original production window. So
yeah, and we're doing pretty good.
Yeah, not bad. I'm pleased to be here because I think we were both quite lucky that this album selection was one that we both have a more than a passing familiarity with. Definitely more than. Yeah, so it was one that certainly allowed us maybe that more compacted time frame. We didn't need to necessarily accrue so many listens or so many new listens anyway to get up to speed.
Well, I think I said to you that I could talk about it right now.
Yeah.
When we decided that we would do King's X's Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. So
there we go, and that of course is the album.
Yes. And I'm very, as I've said with a few albums, I'm very excited to be talking about this one because of just the relationship I have with it.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting that we are talking about it now because they just released a brand new album last year.
Right.
And I think it had been 14 years since they had done an album. So there was an interesting kind of soft synchronicity in that.
For sure.
Just having them have a new release and then having this conversation with you.
I think the momentum of that new album release was somewhat affected by COVID and the sort of world time schedule of adjustments of what was possible during the COVID time period. So I'm sure, because I can remember the momentum coming into the news of that album being recorded and then being in the can waiting for the release date.
They also, Jerry Gaskill has also had health issues, and I think maybe that factored into it a little bit too. I don't know about the release date, but you're right. Like there was, like for a lot of people, COVID changed some rhythms for sure.
Yeah, and we've got, I think Ty Tabor released an album in the interim, like in maybe 21 or...
Something like that, which I still haven't listened to. Yeah. That's actually one thing that I decided was that I wouldn't catch up on their solo work.
Fair enough.
I just stayed 100% with Gretchen Goes to Nebraska.
Yeah, and if I did the same. So I think, although I'd been listening to Ty's album just because... I listened to Ty's album, not in preparation for this.
So, sure.
So I tried to keep my listens still within the history of my initial experience with this album. So I tried not to top load it with a lot of extra experience.
I think that's a good word for it. I did something very similar too. And actually after our Bitches Brew conversation, I had a little bit of a shift for me in how I wanted to focus more on not getting ready to have a conversation, but just to immerse myself in the album.
Okay.
So instead of being concerned about following certain threads that I think I need to know to legitimize having a conversation, I kind of did an intuitive challenge to that and just said, okay, I'm now going to immerse myself in Gretchen Goes to Nebraska and just let things take me where it does. And even today when I was coming out here to do the recording, there was a couple things I thought, well, I could have spent a little bit more time with that because maybe, no, not going to do that. Just focused on how I focused on it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to sort of bring up, or for anybody. There's sort of an academic element, or we'll call it an academic possibility when it comes to taking on one of these subjects. So I think that is a good point to bring up for sure, because there is sort of an academic element to preparing, or at least an academic possibility to preparing for these, and as you look for references and more information outside of, say, the text or outside of the music, that journey on itself is endless and very fruitful.
Oh yeah.
And when you're doing academic work or you're studying something, you sort of do that. You do that process, but really that process doesn't necessarily end. And there's always that point in time where the question of legitimacy, have I legitimized myself enough to hold an opinion or have a discussion, or and there's always that thing that you can just sort of see,
right,
that you haven't quite looked at yet, that would, you would think, oh no, I better go a few steps further.
Yeah, and I think that what you're saying is really valuable, because the answer to it is just to say, I don't know, or I didn't go that far, I didn't go there.
Yeah, and you just cut yourself the break, or you just say, you make the decision.
Right, and it's not like you are saying it's a no. It's actually a yes to other possibilities, to take things in a different direction. Yeah. So when we finished on the Bitches Brew, I think it was just partially too because I just felt like, as we said in the episode, that there's so much more to talk about. So I found that going into this album, I chose to start with the feeling I had when I first realized it existed. So my first experience of Gretchen Goes to Nebraska.
Share,
my first experience of Gretchen Goes to Nebraska was through the beauty of the time that you and I know, which was called Much Music.
Okay.
And I was very innocently watching Much Music when all of a sudden I think it was the Power Hour, because it used to be the Power 30, then it became the Power Hour. It was their metal spot. Yeah. And I was watching, I think it was on that. I'm not really sure what show on Much Music it was, but I tend to think it was that, because that was what I wanted to watch the most.
Right. And Much Music is the Canadian version of MTV at the time. That's an independent enterprise by Moses Namir.
That's right. And they, just as an aside, they took a little bit more of a free form approach to it. It was very easy to see how they let it grow, like how it grew organically. Yeah. Because even MTV was first, but they were figuring out what to do. Yeah. But how do we deal with video? And I mean, the whole industry was shaken up by video, right? Yeah. Video killed the radio star, right? Like it's all of that. But I was watching Much Music, and this video comes on, and I didn't see the very beginning of it. So I didn't know who it was, but I was immediately taken in, and it was the single Over My Head. Okay. And I just absolutely fell in love with the song right away. And okay, King's X, this is the name of the song. And then I waited to see it again so I could record it on my VHS setup, so I'd have the video. I was totally taken by this song. And then within, I think it was a week, I got it at A&B Sound record shop. I bought it on cassette, and I listened to the whole album one go, and I thought that I was listening to the next Rush. Okay. I thought I was hearing something that was going to just dominate an area of my musical interest that had been occupied by primarily Rush, but also Yes. And ever since then, I have just listened to that album. It's not necessarily, I would say, a regular rotation through my life, but I've listened to it countless times, and since then. And so the other thing about this album, though, that also happened for me is nobody else I knew seemed to know about it. And it again, which I feel like is something I've said a few times in our conversations, this album had a very solitary journey for me.
Okay.
Like I don't really know of any other King's X fans the way that I saw them and the way that I felt about them.
Yeah.
So it again was one of those, which is something I was used to, because if anyone has listened to some of our conversations, they'll know that there was something about my musical life early on that there were just things that, because I was interested in so many different types of music, there was just some things that got more attention than other things. And the things that didn't get attention, they just were very personal and stayed with me. And so Gretchen Goes to Nebraska and King's X has been very much like that for me. And that was the first time that was my first exposure to them, was through a video. And then I got the tape and just melted it by playing it so much.
Wow.
How about you?
Well, it's interesting. I just have a quick question for you. First, like, I'm curious because your first exposure was through video.
Yeah.
And did you at the point identify with image or music? Did you separate the two? Like, did your relationship after that sort of discovery moment, there wasn't a lot of King's X media, we'll say. Yeah.
Well, there was definitely more for Gretchen Goes to Nebraska and Faith, Hope, and Love.
Yeah.
I mean, out of their first album, they didn't get the kind of exposure. But that's an interesting question, and I could talk about that for a long time. So I'm going to just refine it really quickly and say the reason why I thought they were going to be, at least for me, as big as Rush was because they were a power trio.
Yeah.
And I was very taken by the fact that not only did they have an exceptionally beautiful lead vocalist, they all sang. Yeah. The drummer sings, the guitar player sings, and they sound so good. And so what I saw visually in that video is they shot it in a performance type way, because by that time they were becoming, especially out of certain forms of music, seeing the band play as if they were playing live was a very common way to convey the band's image, was to just be literal. Yeah. And so that's kind of what the video had. And I just thought that knowing right away that they were a power trio, but they had the vocals as well between all three of them, that really took me in. And then also just seeing Ty Tabor play, like the guitar solo, just as I'm sure we'll get to it, it's such a gorgeous solo, and that I could actually see him do that. And so there was there's that thing about how when you see something, visuals can become very visceral. Yeah, they can be very visceral, and so I felt that there was a visceral experience of that band in that video for me. So I think partially it was that I really took it in. It really reached me, like the gospel approach to the vocals, and then how, which I know we're going to talk about more, their sound. Yeah. But paired with what you're saying, I think that them knowing that it was a power trio, and quite honestly, knowing that the lead singer was black. Yeah. I found that to be it didn't compel me to get the album anymore, but it was just a very interesting way to step into recognizing the band, because also I think paired with this is that we grew up into the state of video. Yeah. So it wasn't new, but it still was. And it was, back in the day, it was hard to get access to the information and knowledge about artists and their work that we have now. Like, I can't imagine what our podcast would be if we were doing this in 1980. It would be very different. So just to see what they looked like and how. So I had a visual clarity as to who's doing what. I think that also had something of an impact for me.
Yeah, you said that performance aspect of seeing the performance on video and just being, and how real it was, right?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
like when the physicality of playing. I mean, there's the theater of playing on video. When you know, like if you're watching a Winger video and you see Kip dancing around with his guitar with his shirt open, he you know, that's not the same performance energy that he put down in the studio when he played those parts,
and probably not the same performance energy in general.
Yeah,
because he knows the camera's running.
He knows the camera's running, whereas you know, so you don't get the sense of, you know, what through his physical presentation of in the moment, what he was like. His body's evoking the music that as he played it. You know, like there's a disconnect there, and you know, so there's almost a falseness to it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, when you see a real live video, or at least a video that is more, we'll say, realistically representative of what they would have played and how they would have played something. There's just the connection you get from seeing the physical playing of something and the way the musicians express themselves through the physical act of playing.
Yeah, and
is
I
a
think
different thing.
It is, and I think also the age that I was at. This came out in '89.
Yeah,
I was 16. At that age, you care a lot about image generally.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying is not only reflective of the age that I was at, but it's also very reflective of the industry and why video was such a huge piece to the music industry. But coming away with that first seeing of the band, it energized me.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, I made sure it's going to come around. This video is going to be seen again. I want to capture it on a VHS so I can watch it as much as I like.
Yeah. And
I'm going to go get the album. Yeah.
That's awesome. So I'll answer your question to me about my sort of first experience, but I don't want to abandon the reference to Doug as a black band member.
Yeah.
There's different ways we may bring that back into the conversation. But I know for me, during that time period, although black artists were all over the pop charts, they were certainly had been historically underrepresented in sort of hard rock and even rock. You know, but for me that seemed very strange because I worship Jimi Hendrix, right?
I know where this is going.
and you know, and the pioneers of the blues guys, of
course,
and the early
jazz,
the early pioneers, and then there was just sort of this sort of like, I don't want to call it just a sea of white faces in the genre that we were really passionate about. That was missing from rock. And even though now you can go back and you can sort of say, oh, well, there was Phil from Thin Lizzy, and you can kind of construct the baton being passed between different people. It was a curious absence in many ways.
But I think what you're pointing at is that there's a lack of, like why I pointed it out is because it was noticeable.
Yeah.
And so there's this thing about musicians exploring and experimenting, and the more exploring and experimenting that's going on, the more variety you see. But then over time, you also start to see trends.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you. There was, I'm not as versed in where metal and hard rock is now especially because there's so much of it and there's so many bands in that. But back in those days, it was very obvious that there were very, very few musicians of color in hard rock and metal, and that's exactly why it stood out. But it's standing out. I was thrilled about that, just as I was even more thrilled about Living Color.
Well, yeah, Living Color.
And there's the same time. Like, that's the same. Living Color's first album came out in 88.
Yeah.
And this one came out in 89. Yeah. So, yeah. And just the fact that there is, that we're saying that and that we're noticing that, really speaks to that time period.
Right. And we can talk about, Bad Brains and, you know, and again, kind of sort of make some bridges sort of into the past.
Entombed had I believe one of the guitar players was African American, but I'm not 100% sure about that right now.
Yeah, it's, as you can go back and do that. The thing that I take note of, especially when you bring up Living Color, is something called the Black Rock Coalition, which was something that Vernon Reid was a part of, that still exists in some form today, but that was also really trying to take on this question of where are these black musicians, and get young kids and young black kids hyped about and participating in rock music, because in many ways, that they'd already planted flags there, and their place and their absence there was it was their territory. It was and when I first heard Doug's voice,
oh boy,
when I first heard Vernon play and saw Living Color for the first time, I mean, when things come together and suddenly you realize like there is balance in the force. Like there was
it was just like when Anthrax and Public Enemy teamed up.
Yeah,
I was so happy about that. Happy's not the right word. I was so engaged with that. I was so interested in that. And just like you said, when Ice-T started Body Count, so his friend Ernie C, who plays guitar, could play guitar. Because Ice-T saw that whenever he was rapping over in Europe, there would be mosh pits, and so he saw a connect, and so he put it together. But he part of it is that he gave his friend an opportunity to play.
Yeah.
I don't know all the ins and outs of that, and I might be missing some information, but just the fact that we're bringing it up and talking about it, and how there is this really interesting historical gap when you look at how not only you have Jimi Hendrix, but you have someone like Sister Rosetta Tharpe that basically started rock guitar on her own, completely on her own, solo, singing and playing.
Like I say, the land was already claimed. It was their land. In that sense, like they'd already planted the flag there, and were kind enough to invite everyone. But whether whatever metaphor you use or how you describe it, you're not going to capture the story of it.
No, because there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, because
we haven't done all of the work about this either, so to speak.
For sure. But it certainly for two rock music and guitar-centric music fans, it was such a welcome and sort of like the meal you didn't know you were starving for kind of situation. Like you just suddenly, oh yes, this is what I've been missing, and that was part of certainly my enthusiasm for King's X as well. But I didn't see video of them. My first encounters with them are, here in this room, which is still the slowly coming together studio creative space. Post my big move is that I've got a whole bunch of old guitar magazines in bookshelves behind me.
Yeah.
And my first exposure to King's X comes from little references in old guitar mags, when I was younger in real time, because they were getting some underground or guitar centric press.
Right.
From they were on Megaforce, which was, I think, if I remember right, like a sort of like a niche metal label.
It was only metal, and in fact, they were hoping King's X would open up more avenues for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Megaforce had Metallica, they had Anthrax, they had Testament. So yeah, they were very much a metal label.
Yeah, and as a label, they were very good at getting their guys sort of talked about in guitar press. So I heard of Out of a Silent Planet, the first album, just through little references, and one of the odd things was as you exchange information. So you get your magazine, you read about it, and then you talk to your friends about it. And I can remember the first confusion is no one knew exactly what the band was called, right?
Right.
Now, if you saw them on Much Music, and certainly if you saw them introduced as something, then you would have got that, King's X. But just reading it, there was some. Is this King's X, King's Cross, King's 10?
Yeah.
Like, what is this band called? And coupled with the religious, not just overtones, but some of the explicit religious references, both in the music, but in the way people talked about them.
Yeah.
That it was King's 10. Is that a Bible chapter? I think Kings is a chapter in the Bible. Your head was, as a kid, you were just trying to figure out, but just not knowing what they were called. So when we got together as young people to talk about this band, I vividly remember guys saying King's Cross.
Really?
Calling them King's Cross, because we just hadn't heard
someone
the name uttered.
Officially say what
the band is called. And I do have a vague memory of some music press somewhere where someone said, just clarify, what's the name of the band? How do I pronounce the name of the band? So that's when I find it's like, oh, thank God. So now I know. now I'm not going to be that guy that's, mispronouncing the band wrong, or,
that's Rob over there. Just don't tell him your name, because he won't say it right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how sure I was. I just went with King's X, and it just seemed to be that's what it was. Because I don't remember. I just remember seeing the video. I don't remember it being introduced. But that is interesting. That's an interesting little subcultural element, because I know that I've heard some of the issues they had around their name, but this is the first I heard.
Well, just the initial confusion of like not even being, because it's an odd name to intuitively go, oh well, that's the name of the band. Like Kings, like is the X a symbol? It really gets the imagination going. Yeah, we just didn't know, right? Yeah. But then the references to Gretchen started happening, and you would also see little references in other people's interviews where they would mention, "Oh, this band with these guys, you got to listen to this, and they do this," and so there was a build-up underground within guitar and music press for insiders. Lots of little references from people that were sort of pointing to them as this thing that it was going to be huge, but that was immediately amazing, and that we had to check out. So I did what you did, is I ran out and at some point found Gretchen on CD and Silent Planet, and had my mind blown by the music. It was like you described. There was just an immediacy of hearing that and just going like, I need this. I need this. I need this. This is mana. It's musical mana, and these guys are new prophets. Because they're firing in all the messages. At that time. Yeah. And I also had. I'm not going to call it the baggage, but I also was still self-identified as a born again Christian at the time.
Oh,
right?
okay.
But one of those born again Christians that in his teens had his own leaving of the church, in the sense that they start funneling you into youth groups at a certain point in time. And the focus, unfortunately, of the youth groups in 1981 through the end of the 80s was all satanic panic and devil music and backwards masking and stuff. So
hence the accordion.
No,
we're not going to get into it. But
accordion.
I just thought I would. If you want to know more about this, please listen to episode 2 or 1.
I'm in denial that what accordion. I had no nod of what
Season 1,
speak.
episode 1, the Accordion Chronicles.
Yeah, that was part of my interest in them. I was curious how they were navigating or negotiating this thing.
Which thing? The
Christianity,
thing? Oh, okay,
Christianity, and it was, again, that was kind of an unknown about them. Were they a Christian band? Were they not a Christian band?
It's such an interesting part
of the story.
Yeah. And I know that when I got through that first album, it was very obvious that there was a lot of that type of languaging that made me think about Christianity. And then, sure enough, when I did see an interview with them, or I read about them, that would come up as them being a Christian band. And I didn't care. Mm-hmm. It was just another piece of information, as far as I was concerned, that kind of sat around my immediate visceral sonic devotion. But that has been a very, interesting might be a little cold-hearted to say about it, because it was a challenge for them in a number of ways. Well, to navigate that,
even for me, as we'll again loosely say Christian at the time.
See, I would have thought that Sgt. Pepper, your experience with Sgt. Pepper, would have just nullified that.
Well, I did what these guys did.
Right.
I did what this album does. I took my journey, and I took what I knew.
Yeah.
And what I believed and what I felt, and I reconciled it into a personal spiritual treatise of understanding and moving forward that allowed me, at least at the time, just to remain Christian identified.
Right.
And see sort of spirituality and the one's journey through life as a more cerebral, spiritual, metaphysical, personal journey that stripped of dogma and stripped of we'll call it the influence of organized church or
orthodoxy.
Orthodoxy, great word. So I and them as a Christian band, the other, even for someone with that sort of self-identification, that wasn't a good thing. That was like more of a disqualifying thing for that person. Part of the challenges, because we had Stryper was the one that we were all supposed to get behind.
Amazing.
The brothers Sweet in Stryper, and I don't want to knock.
But then you look at a band like U2, not a problem.
Not a problem. Yeah. Equally.
Yeah, and especially since they called themselves the Edge. The King's X was actually the Edge at one point.
So interesting, isn't it? Yeah. When I picked up on that was so cool. Yeah. And I had a friend who was a gaga over Phil Keaggy at the time, and so their relationship to Phil Keaggy was a part of that ethos that I kind of. Or not ethos, the sort of mythos or the story of how I kind of learned of them and got into them more. But the Christian thing itself I was very skeptical because I don't want that. I didn't want that label, and neither did they.
No, and I mean maybe this is aftercast material.
Maybe.
I don't know, but the learning about their views on that and where they saw themselves and how to navigate that. I've really that's one of the things I've really appreciated about this time of spending with the album and have this conversation is just to take the time to dig in to find out more about how they speak about it,
right?
How they feel about it, and the thing about Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, since we've already gotten into the Christian element, is that I'm going to call it their Christianity.
Okay.
Or actually, no, I'm going to call it their spiritual platform. That is one of the things that after a number of years I realized was also reaching me through this album. That there was a very particular spiritual, mystical, even if you want to say sacred, but like an organic, a natural, sacred feeling that also reached me, but it didn't do it in a dogmatic way. It didn't do it in a heavy-handed way, and so I never had a problem with them being, if they had been, Because for me, through Gretchen Goes to Nebraska and then their follow-up album, Faith, Hope, and Love, which even that title makes you think, well, they've got to be a Christian band at this point. It was never a problem for me. So I really appreciate you expressing this to me because we haven't talked about that before for you. And so,
I definitely think nice. You're mentioning Aftercast. I think that we have more freedom in the Aftercast to sort of go deeper down some of these side tangents. Yeah. They're all part of this discussion. The problem is we only have so long that we can
episode proper
for the episode proper that we can indulge, and we can easily spend all our time going down one track, and so.
I think that's definitely one of those tracks.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad that you brought it up, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, it'll be my pleasure. I mean, this is real stuff, right?
Yeah,
exactly. We're having real conversations here, and
for sure.
When you talk, I liked your idea about spiritual platform. This album, and what I appreciated, and for me, one of my immediate takeaways is that. This isn't an album that is proselytizing, right? It's not. It's not an album that where they have the answer. Like if you listen to a Stryper album at the time, they're telling you what it is, right?
Yeah.
This is an album of uncertainty, about journey. That's what spirituality as a quest. Spirituality as growth, as fear, as doubt, as pathways, messy pathways. And that message is so fundamentally one of the sort of the human journeys that we, I think, privilege as seekers ourselves. That it's so universal that it's sort of fundamental to humanity, and so one of the things that makes this album so rich is that it really taps into something that is just like a fundamental human pursuit without label, it's like the unfolding of the journey through the album is something we're all familiar with. There's mirrors and parallels to so many life processes and so many different things in that. And so
that's a nice way to put it.
Yeah. So as it's a pretty special album, just, if that was like my summation kind of statement, just from that, like that's kind of what we're dealing with here, I think, or what we're looking at.
It's
right?
interesting because I have my own little summation, because as it's been said very clearly by Jerry Gaskill, this is not a concept album.
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with him,
Yeah.
but it is Jerry Gaskill, so I got to give him. We got to be honest about the person who actually wrote the one thing that you could say cohesively brings the album together, because the title "Gretchen Goes to Nebraska" was a title that was given to them by one of their roadies on tour for their previous album, and they liked it so much that they were adamant about using it for the title for the next album. And then, as the story that I found, Jerry Gaskill said that he just had an aha moment with the story, and then he wrote out this short story referring to this young girl named Gretchen and a journey. And when you read it, for me, it was like a first or second draft of a spiritual journey.
Yeah.
And it's actually, it made me want to seek out more writing by him, because there's a real nice play of verse and prose in a very spiritual, open way, like just the way that you spoke about the album, your summation.
Yeah.
I think you could attribute that to his short story of Gretchen Goes to Nebraska.
Well, it's stylized, right? It's stylized within a tradition of using
what's stylized?
The language and the story itself, how he wrote that. So it's a stylization that I recognize, of that kind of story. You'll find that with other. So he was writing in a sort of like a, not sort of in a voice like that. I wouldn't expect his writing to be that.
I just don't know.
Yeah.
That's why it would make me interested. But the reason why I said it was kind of like a first or a second draft wasn't to be critical, like a criticism, like that's what's wrong with it.
Right.
It's that I think that there's a visceral immediacy about it. And
that's
laying
it down.
Laying it down.
Laying
and
it
I
down.
think that that's how they make music together. Is there's this very trusting, visceral process that they share.
Right.
And so my summation of the album has a little bit of I have to do a little bit of a setup for it.
Sure, I'll sit back and not interrupt. So,
don't fall asleep.
What?
Okay. Yeah. Did you ever watch a British sitcom called Good Neighbors?
Maybe.
Okay. It's back in the 70s, and the premise is very simple. The premise was a couple in their 40 and no kids, and they live in a very ritzy avenue in Britain in the 70s. And one day the husband decides that he's not happy with his life and he wants to change it, and he doesn't know what it is. What is this thing that he wants to do? And then he has this realization that he wants to become self-sufficient. He basically wants to turn their home and their yard into a well-running self-sufficiency project right in this very, very affluent, rich neighborhood, right? So it's kind of like the Beverly Hillbillies, I guess you could say, but it probably inspired the Beverly Hillbillies for all I know. Anyways, through their processes, they have to, they're doing agriculture, they're doing gardening, and so they have this allotment, and an allotment is like a communal garden. And this one episode, they go, don't worry, I'm going to get there. They go to this communal garden, and there's a greenhouse there, and there's a man who owns a greenhouse, and he's an older guy, and he talks to himself all the time. So they think he's really interesting, and so in this episode, they go to talk to him, and when they come upon him, he's talking to the plants in the greenhouse. So they start asking him about this. And he said, well, really, what I'm doing is it's not really the words that I'm saying, but it's the feeling that I'm transmitting. And these are the words. Think of it like the brotherhood of creation. And when I heard that, when I was, I don't know how old when I saw it, it just stuck with me. And, the word brotherhood kind of can put it into a certain area of thinking that is, it's not humanity, it's brother, right? It's very male centric, but it's the idea that what he's doing is conveying his feelings to the plants about we're all here together, right? We're doing this together. For me, my summation of Gretchen Goes to Nebraska is kind of out of that. And I feel that this album is reflective of companionship. So like you spoke of how there's the journey piece, and that it's a very shared, the spirituality of life is a very shared human thing. I feel that we're in the same kind of headspace with it.
Yeah.
So for me, I reflected on the album and times that I've listened to it, and I often found myself thinking about how, yeah, I would listen to this for a feeling of companionship. And I think that what comes from the album, that idea, those ideas of companionship are lyrical, they're in the lyrics, but it's also in the sound. It's also in how they play together. Like Pleiades and the instrumental, I wouldn't call it an interlude because it's like half of the song is just them basically vamping towards this climax. The integration of their performance and the patience and the steps that they take as they play that would be a way of me conveying that visceral sonic companionship that I hear in the album.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, when they think of concept albums, their focus on trying to figure out just what that is or what's going on with a concept album is all lyrics, right? They delve into the lyrics, and you can overlook the significance of the musical element to that and what's actually happening musically. So that's one of the things that I love about this album, and some of the songs in particular is, they're journeying in the song. Like the song itself is 1 foot, the next foot, they're going somewhere.
But and I read a couple of reviews that actually talked about how you get a sense of ease out of their playing. And I think that's a very valid perspective on their performances, is that nothing feels like it's rushed. Nothing feels like it's being, like you said, about it being forced at you.
They're not trying to get through it.
No.
It itself, the journey is the thing.
Yeah.
So like when they're playing, they are so into the journey that it literally elevates. It takes on. We talked about liminal last time. It takes on this other.
You talk about liminal almost every episode.
I do. I got a thing with liminal. I still believe in magic.
That's another conversation. but that's when okay, let's pick something. Doug's voice. Yeah. You soar with his. I soar with his voice.
You soar with his voice. With his humanity is so present in that voice.
Yeah.
You hurt with it. You exalt with it. It attaches to you as a listener and makes you open your mouth. Like,
I know,
as if you're singing it.
I was singing on the bus on the way here.
Yeah, that would have been fun.
You're totally yes. Well, and I think, but that is coming into the whole, all three of them singing.
Yeah, and I think you're right too, though. Like just your mention about the ease of it, there is something to that.
It's like the difference between the gallop in Seventh Son, with other Iron Maiden previous albums. When we talked about Seventh Son of the Seventh Son, Iron Maiden, I talked about how the gallop just seemed like they're in the pocket of it. Yeah. And there's an ease in it, whereas previous recordings that seem to be, what were you saying? We got to get to the next village.
Yeah.
We got to get to the town.
Hurry up. Let's go.
There's no rushing in this album.
It was galloping for the gallop itself, for the wind in your hair, right? Yeah. And the whole band embraced it on that album. Yeah. Whereas, and you're totally right. this album as well, and we'll probably get back to it, but the similarities to Seventh Son, there's several that are worth considering, you know, and
I can see that.
And there are, you know, in terms of how it was assembled and recorded and the participation of all the band members in the songwriting process, one person in the band having the sort of origin point, but then the album not being that story, not being, but still, you know, being sort of compiled and assembled in.
And in that sense, this album would justify them being called King's Cross, because in terms of what you just said about how they write music together, and then just how conceptually or the content lyrically, there is a crossing.
Yeah.
There's a number of elements that are coming together in ideas and in concepts that none of them inhabit the center.
Right.
But there is a center. But all of them are coming together, and then in their coming together, the center is present, but you can't actually reach it.
Yeah, well, even if you don't use the word cross, the visual of an X with just explicitly that intersection, right?
X marks the spot.
Marks, and X marks the spot, and marks is another thing. For me, that mark is possibly the mark of Cain, you know, from a Hermann Hesse,
right?
From Damien.
But
you know?
From what I read about them choosing that name, I don't even. I got the impression that Doug Pinnick still doesn't like the name. So, but I get what you're saying, and this is something we do. You know, we definitely like to play in the open field of thought.
Yeah, we're flipping over rocks and seeing what scurries out.
Hey, look, there's a crab.
We were at the same beach, I'm sure.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that just the idea of how this album is a multitude of, like, I mean, all albums are that, but the things that come together in this album, I think, really do so with a very, like I said, for me, it's a companionship idea.
Yeah.
So whether you feel like you are Dante with Virgil, or you are simply on a stroll with your lover hand in hand somewhere, or how that familial feelings or whatever they may be, I believe that this is something also, from what I've read about people's anecdotes about their feelings about the band and the album, that I think that they actually embody those kinds of feelings. Like they compel all the anecdotes I read of other musicians. They were all talking about them as they're the best, great friends. They're beautiful, generous people. Yeah. And I feel that this album has a kind of generosity about it.
Right.
Just in, like, obviously that wasn't their experience in making this album, but it's happened for a lot of people. Like, the evidence is so clear.
Yeah.
I read King's Accent Oral History. I only read up to the Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. I didn't read beyond that. And there's accounts from all, the musicians they've toured with, musicians talking about their first engagement with the band or hearing the album. And there, no one says it the same way, but the same feeling comes up again. And it's very wholesome. It's very, lots of gratitude. And it's amazing whenever, in the way the book works, is that it's just, they've recorded people's feelings and thoughts and that, and then they've transcribed them. And so when you mix, they've got people like Scott Ian, Rod Morgenstein talking about the band, and then you have the band saying some things, and there's this interesting quality that comes up and comes up again and again about how they just embody a lot of the things we're talking about we hear in the music.
Yeah.
Which is lovely.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
So, speaking of the album,
yeah,
and the music, when I was doing my reading, my research, the one musical aesthetic view that they had, that they shared, was that they wanted to be heavy melody. And that was one of the things I brought into my listening to it over the last few weeks, was heavy melody. Like, where is this heaviness, and how does the melodicism come into it? And I found myself listening to a couple of things more so than I ever have before. One of those things is the harmonies. My mind seemed to be really going inside those chords and those relationships. But the other thing is Doug Pinnick's bass.
Yeah.
12-string bass sound.
12-string hammer.
Yes, a hammer.
Yeah. And great. I mean, it's got a very unique, when used, a very unique sound.
Yeah.
Most people, if they need a reference point, Jeremy,
Yeah.
the opening to Jeremy, right? Pearl Jam's Jeremy. It is surprising when you put your ear to it, how much you can hear that bass chiming in the background of everything, with that sound, and how much it just adds to the tapestry of what you're hearing without even necessarily hearing it specifically. Like it's there. That you'll hear it, like it'll sort of jump out a little bit as another layer moves away and leaves a little space, and you'll hear it. Oh, it's still there. Yeah, there it is. And what I thought is it works really well with some of the stuff that Jerry is doing, particularly with some of the small cymbals he's playing, some of the more Asian sort of styled small cymbal playing,
like the splashes.
Some of the small cymbal splashes, but just like you get a different register that's often associated.
That's the word.
That's often associated with Asian music tropes and stuff of people like you got your gongs, but then you got those little cymbals and stuff too. But all those create this sort of magical space that also. It tells you you're not in you're in a very different space.
That's very well said. I'm right there with you.
Yeah,
it really. And actually, I was wanting for a little bit more bass sometimes, because he's got some really nice lines. And when I found out that one of his biggest bass influences was Chris Squire.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
I brought that into this listening, and I actually found myself hearing some bass work that hadn't really stuck out before.
Yeah.
But the way you put that is, it really does add that 12-string bass brings something in that is very, very distinctive.
Yeah, and
not
a gimmick. Like it's not a gimmick,
not at all a gimmick. And I read a bit about Doug's relationship playing a 12-string bass, and he talked about. He said, "Well, it's not like playing a bass. Yeah. There's definitely a different feeling and approach to it." And you mentioned Jerry Gaskill paired with that. One other thing that I really appreciate about this album, that if you're a drummer. And somebody says to you, you really need to listen to Ringo of the Beatles. What other Ringo is there? Jerry Gaskill is of the same ilk as far as I'm concerned. And he does phenomenal... He makes phenomenal choices in his drumming. That part of what I was thinking about, and wondered what you thought about this, is that I wonder if that is partially because he has a vocal role in the band. Because I find that his drumming on this album is very, very orchestral, in the fact that he's looking for places to put the drums without just holding time as you normally would. Yeah. Like in the last track.
Yeah, there's some beautiful symphonic
work. Yeah, but then also how he will create tension to come to a close of a chord change or going into a different part of a song. He's got this the Ringo aesthetic. Like he's doing more with less, but at the same time, I think that I wonder, I'm not 100% sure, that what you talked about, his relationship with Doug and their choices is informed by how they both sing. Because I know that Sam Taylor did a lot to make this album what it is. The producer, engineer, manager, video editor, video person, that he actually had them work on vocal work. Like when they were doing Out of the Silent Planet, he basically workshopped them. He got them a big rehearsal space and had them work days. They'd spend a day working on vocal harmonies.
Yeah.
So yeah, Jerry's playing on it is just very notable. Very notable.
And it's interesting also to note how natural those drums sound. Like,
how do you mean?
Well, he didn't go for the big cliches of the time. So, although there's some treatment on the drums, they're not Simmons. They're not. They're not. They don't have some of the musical tropes that let's just throw this on the drums and get this modern drum sound. Like there's an acoustic. I still connect with the acoustic element of the kit.
And I think that was because of Sam Taylor. Like a few of the anecdotal passages I read by other people in the industry, like Megaforce management, and that they talked about how Sam Taylor felt like when he first when he was presented with King's X. Apparently, he went home and told his wife, "I've found the next Beatles." And so when they made Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, especially Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, that's how it was felt that he was treating it, like they were the Beatles. So I would see how he would maybe have been looking to the Beatles, perhaps as a compass in how to make their sound be what it was. And so your reference to the drums.
Well, I was just so surprised. It's why the album doesn't sound dated, right?
Oh yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
like it sounds as sort of present in its. It's not connected to a nouveau aesthetic.
Okay, how about it's not like the gating on the snare that you found in Phil Collins's drumming.
Well, I didn't want to bring that one up, but absolutely.
But I think it's a very valid. Was he talking about drums? Gating is a treatment you can make where the reverberant, the natural acoustic reverberance of a sound is just cut off.
Yeah.
And so it makes it turns something that's acoustic and can make it sound very mechanical,
right?
Can make it sound very inorganic. And that was a big thing in a lot of the pop music. The drums were very gated.
Right. And they were reverse gated too, you know, like they did both. You had all these sort of cliched, overused in their time, but that really, when you listen to music, some of it doesn't. I don't want to say it's not that it hasn't aged well, but it just it
really puts you somewhere in time and
keeps you there.
Yeah, you
keeps
stick
you
there.
Yeah. So I really really appreciated and noticed that as I listened to this, is that wow, part of why this feels so fresh and exciting as I listen even now is that it's not stuck there.
And I'm going back to more of an overview of the band. No one else sounded like them. Nobody. They like when I was listening to Gretchen Goes to Nebraska earlier on in my life, I just understood that there wasn't a place where they went.
Yeah.
They were their own thing. And it's amazing how much support they got from other musicians. Like a lot of support. Anthrax took them on tour. AC/DC took them on tour. Winger took them on tour because they just loved to hear them play.
Yeah.
And I think that what we're kind of talking about perhaps is that this album in particular, because I've listened to their other albums, and this album sticks out in the way that you're speaking about it. There's a I mean, we use the word organic a lot, so maybe I'll use something different.
Yeah.
There's just this timelessness at times for me with the sonic nature of this album.
Yeah.
And actually what you're talking about, because you're talking about the drums, that's a very important feature of generating a sound of a rock, of a number of different types of music. But when you have a drum kit, that sound informs the rest of the band so much.
Here's an interesting thing to consider. When you think of them as sort of like Beatles, and we'll call it Sgt. Pepper and Beyond, or Revolver and Beyond, right? Like at that era of Beatles. Unlike the Beatles, King's X could take this to the stage and still
Kill.
Yeah, just like so. This is if you dig into the production on this, and this is a power trio. Jerry's got like 3 guitar parts, and each one's like tripled or doubled.
You mean Ty?
Pardon me. Ty's got 3. Big mistake. Ty's got like multiple guitar parts, and then they're voiced and tripled, and there's harmonies, and there's so much going on. There's so much depth in those. But this band can play with drum, bass, and guitar, and 3 vocal mics, and they can perform these songs with the same kind of vitality and excitement that doesn't require the production that's on the album, and you don't go, oh yeah, too bad. Like there
is one song though, according to them, that they only tried once live, and then they never played it again.
Oh, which one's that?
Don't Believe It. The
really?
vocal harmonies were just too hard to pull off, because they've got these falling lines. Like it's a canon, right? It's got that canon feel to it, and apparently, but yes,
yeah,
and that's why people took them on tour.
Yeah,
because they could do it, could pull it off.
Just so exciting as a band. Now I believe
what's exciting?
King's X.
Did someone turn a page and I missed? Okay, King's
X
okay.
as a band. Just so excited.
Yeah.
I believe they're going to be at the Rickshaw.
Oh, the Rickshaw.
Yeah, like in the fall. That's my recollection. I saw something.
Is there any chance they'll be at the Commodore?
Yeah.
Because I actually looked to see what their tour dates were, and the last I saw, they were all United States shows, Nashville and that. And then I watched a recent interview with the 3 of them, a Zoom interview. And at the beginning of it, Jerry Gaskill was asked, "How are you doing?" And he said, "Very happy to be at home." So I thought, they're probably not coming up here then.
We'll between the podcast and the aftercast, we'll have a quick look to see if we can find. Are they coming to our city?
Yeah.
This. Do you within the music of the tracks? We talked about the sort of identifying with Doug's voice, right? And sort of like finding like yourself opening. I said opening your mouth, but as he's singing, because you're right there with him in that sense.
Not in register though.
No. Well, yeah. Wow.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And now, as a quick aside, King's X have done what a lot of older artists have done. They keep tuning down and down and down.
Well,
so,
but they did tune down.
They tuned down anyway.
That's actually another piece to their sound that a lot of people weren't really inhabiting.
Yeah. Not just drop D, but tuning down to D.
Yeah, tuning down to D, and that was part of their heavy sound.
Yeah.
Which wasn't heavy.
Yeah.
Like, it's not heavy metal.
No, it's not chugga, like, chugga.
No, it's more like a stone or a dense wood.
Yeah.
It's like oak weight, But I think you were going somewhere that
I want to talk about Ty's guitar tone.
Oh, yes, I do too.
Because
the big secret.
Wow, does that guitar tone like it reminds me of a metal version of Clapton's Woman Tone on Cream, and it not because it sounds the same, although there are some similarities there, because what they're both trying to do is give the guitar a voice. That almost feels like again organic, voice. A human voice.
Yeah.
And it is so similarly when I'm listening to him playing lines, my mouth is opening like I'm a talk box or something.
You've got
and
guitar face.
I'm shaping notes
Shredder
with
face.
my mouth, and I've got that thing going on. So I probably look really interesting in the car when I'm driving. But similarly, it's like there's something so direct from the human sort of mechanic. We had a discussion last where we talked about the interface between music and the mind, and then having to get it out through.
Right, you were talking about being in the shower. Yeah, and hearing music in your head.
Yeah. And that when you're playing music, you've got this physical thing that you've got to get through to get it, and all these all these layers between the musical expression and how you feel it, and how it eventually comes out in the mechanics of it. Right?
It's a very intricate series of unit conversions.
Yeah. Ty's playing just seems to be coming from somewhere much closer to the source, in the sense, like it seems to somehow not have been encumbered or inhibited or interfered with by getting, going through finger mechanics. I'm not, I can see I can visualize what he's playing from a fingering sense, but I can't hear the remnants of the finger mechanics as like that you I don't know if that's a clear thought, but like sometimes when you listen to music, you can hear, not only do you hear the music, you can sort of hear the mechanical element of the finger mechanics and the thing that he needed to practice to get to the point to do the finger. Like you can sort of see
what Rob is trying to say is that Ty Tabor plays with great ease.
He plays.
And I'll relax and I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and you recognize that ease earlier as a whole band thing.
Exactly. And they all do it.
Yeah, and it's phenomenal. Like he's one of the most phenomenal natural players that I've ever heard that way. Like there's
So I have a question for you about that.
Yeah.
Do you hear it in everything he does, or are you thinking about just solos? Are you thinking about his rhythm playing, or is it just across the board?
Well, I hear so many things. I mean, my relationship to my mind wandering as he plays, and I definitely hear it. When he solos, it's like a scat singer, right?
Right.
It's you just need to listen to off of what is it, Moan Jam, right?
Which is ironically my favorite track on that album.
Yeah,
and actually, it's not just because there's this ridiculously long guitar solo in it. It's because there is a ridiculously long guitar solo in it, and then when Doug comes in, he kills it with one note.
Yeah.
He completely soars above the whole solo with just this one high note. It's incredible. But I think part of what you're talking about is I hear that too. Because obviously I've already said there's a great ease that I hear as a band as a total. So in the band as a total, which means each player has to have their own ease.
Yeah.
When I was, one of the big research things for me of delving into the album this time was about his sound, because it was funny when we talked about doing a concept album and I did my first list.
Yeah.
This was again one of those albums that was in those first because actually I wasn't even sure if we would do it, because I wasn't sure if it would be sanctioned as concept album material, just because we hadn't started yet, right?
Sure.
But so I really wanted to. I remembered that, I don't know how he gets his sound. I got to deal with this.
Yeah.
There must be answers now. And fortunately, there's answers everywhere. But one thing that I found he said about his tone was that it's in the pick he uses. So he was asked, like, where does your tone come from? And he said, really, my tone starts with the pick. And he said that there's a very particular type of pick that was made by Mel Bay, and it has like a thin, very flexible tip, and then the part that you grab is highly gripped. He said that's where his tone comes from.
Right.
And then I found another interview where he actually named the amplifier that he'd kept secret all these years. Sorry.
And then there's also the guitar, right?
Yeah, but I'm not there yet.
Okay.
So,
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I'm
Of
rolling
course.
it back.
No, but I think the reason why I started with the pick is because that was the first thing I found, and I thought it was very truthful, because I know what kind of pick I want to use, and if I'm not holding it, I'm not going to play the way that I know that I like to play. So what he also said, though, was there was two reasons why he kept the amp a secret. The first reason was because he was afraid that other people would sound like him. And then he realized after a number of years that was wrong, because nobody can sound like anybody else.
Right.
But the second reason was because the amp that he was using was a Lab L5,
right,
which is what B.B. King used.
Yeah.
But he would mod it out, so he'd take out the components and put it into another. And he said that there was so few of them.
Yeah, he was worried about supply.
That he wouldn't have access to it anymore. Which I thought was okay. I felt that was a cigarette moment. I had my I got the answer I wanted, and I moved on. But I think what you're saying about his playing is just a nice reminder for everyone that what you play through and how it sounds for you is very important. And that's the biggest thing I got from what I researched in his sound.
And it's very important to you.
That's exactly what I was about to say, is that he really made it clear that I really worked at finding the sound that I wanted. Yeah. And that was also what I got out of all of them in terms of what they did. They really wanted to do things the way they wanted to do them. And so I feel that what you described in his playing is also just his sincerity. I think his playing is very sincere.
Yeah, that's a great word.
And that's part of the reason why I do like Moan Jam.
Yeah.
Because, by the way, for those of you who's listening who don't know, Moan Jam is on Faith, Hope, and Love. And it's this beautiful thrash gospel type tune, and it's got this long guitar solo in where the solo usually goes, and he does all of these very guitar-y things, and by the end he's just making noise guitar sounds, and they're really lush and they're really nice, and it really evokes. Well, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Coltrane.
Exactly.
It's just a little bit. Like there's this thing where I'm going to try this, I'm going to be in the blues for a bit, and then I'm going to go here, and then eventually it's just this noise is the final word. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the music you would hear if instead of black gospel choral, there was just guitar.
Yeah.
And so it is like... it's a prayer and a celebration and an exaltation to one's higher power, and so it's a whirling dervish.
Ooh, bringing in the Middle East.
There we go. But on guitar with a very specific deity in mind, and amazing. The live version of that, I believe, possibly from Woodstock 94.
Right, 300,000 people.
Yeah, if I'm remembering right, if that's where that came from, the one that I saw is equally astounding because you like a lot of things that you hear on an album, they can't play them live or
Yeah.
and this is just amazing that to be able to.
Well, and they did what all of those bands did back in the day, is they pushed to live it. So you're cutting your chops,
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
And there was one story in the King's X and oral history where they talked about how they were playing in Missouri in the middle of winter, and they were driving around in this, basically this not a pickup, but like a moving type van, and they all had to sleep in the back, and all they had was blankets, and it's freezing cold outside, and they ran out of gas at the top of the hill, and they had to roll down to the gig, and those are the kinds of things that can become a part of your playing if you allow them to.
Right.
Like I chose not to have a touring musical life, but I've always kept it in mind that my life is in what I do musically, and my music is in my life. Mm-hmm. And I think that that is something. I mean, this is an aside, but that era of musicians in that type of music, rock and metal, and that's how they were able to do a lot of what they did, is that they just had to come up with the energy and the will to play when they didn't want to, and they were tired, and they were hungry, because they were always hungry. Yeah. And so, but the other thing about King's X2, though, I think, is they also had, I speculate this, they had that time with Sam Taylor where he just made them focus on aspects of what they do in isolation, right? So like I said, they would have a vocal day and that. And I think that if you've had any kind of process where you do that, where you compartmentalize and you isolate and you saturate your attention with an element of the totality, you can actually develop a consistency of looking at what you do like that, so that the work of it doesn't seem to be so present, but you get out of it what you've put into it.
Yeah.
This also brings me to mind that I wanted to say about how I had an image of the band come to me about a couple years after Gretchen Goes to Nebraska came out. So this is probably like early 90s. And I was listening to the album, and all of a sudden it was like I took their name, the name of the band, really, really literally. And I suddenly saw them like these wandering troubadours who were in high demand for the highest chords. And I think that what you've said about Ty Tabor's playing evokes that image for me, in that there's an elegance to what they do. There's an elegance in their sound, but I think there's also an elegance in their performances.
Yeah, I fully agree. I really see that. And there's also, there's, people, the discussion can go to an area of like commercial success, and and look at the pitfalls of their journey through art and commerce. But part of me thinks that when you have something that's genuine, that is attached to just their own authentic quest through the world, which includes spirituality, but it's a quest through the world. Like they're questing through the world. They're living that as artists. I get the sense of a certain Jesuit almost aesthetic to that, the troubadour element to that, Wu-Tang, like sort of like a traveling monk, traveling.
We have to do a Wu-Tang album.
Yeah. It's like Wu-Tang, but they're on the road instead of like, wherever the Wu-Tang guys hang. Like they're comfortably hanging somewhere. But it's almost as if that because the journey's so authentic, success would be almost too disruptive. Like the best troupe, you keep on the road so they can keep performing those plays. You don't pull them out of you don't, as soon as this happens in theater, or you get that production that's worked up on the road, that's whatever, and then someone comes in and says, now we're going to put it in the big house, and they stage it and whatever, and it destroys it, right?
I think what you're talking about is that they were fortunate enough to be given time and attention without having to exercise a monopolizing attitude. That is what I mean about the companionship piece.
Yeah.
I like what you just said, because in their early days, nobody knew what to do with them. Nobody knew where to take them in that. But the people who were moved by their music, moved by what they were doing, there was a feeling that they wanted to keep them authentic. No one was going to say, okay, now you need to do this.
Right.
Well, that's not exactly true, but it's kind of in line with what you're saying, is that I think that part of it is they didn't get put into a situation that is, in my view, a great deal of what the music business is about. It's about domination. It's about monopolizing.
Right.
Who's got the number one hit, whose album has reached gold and platinum and all that. And so they weren't tainted by that. But what you're also saying is that there was something around them, if I'm saying it right, please let me know, that kept them from that, saved them from that.
Well, I know
is that what you're saying?
I know their take on, like, I know that the fact that they struggled as a band and struggled against what they perceived as walls, or this lack of leveling up to, sort of like not having to tour, what frustrated them. I know that there were times when their careers in music were on the table as possibly something that they would abandon. What has this all been folly? Is this a pursuit of that we should let go of? And I understand that, and I don't want to unacknowledge that. I definitely want to acknowledge that, but this band was about the journey. The essence of their art was the questions, and it was that
or
going,
is.
That's the sort of end point of this. Like,
right.
This is what it was. And so in many ways, here they are today. I mean, Doug's 72.
I know.
Right.
His voice. Still so beautiful.
They're active, and I think they've answered some of those painful questions for themselves where they were struggling with the idea of why are we still having to work so hard. And I think they've made their peace with the fact that, because that's what we do. That's we are that band, and we are, and it's not that we're working so hard for something or to achieve something, that we just are being what we are. And
right. And from all accounts that I read, that's what they've always done. But I think that what you're talking about happens to everybody in a very simple sense, right? There's roadblocks, there's challenges, there's difficulties. But I do think I understand what you're getting at in terms of early on, the people who supported them compared them to the Beatles.
Yeah.
How is that not going to sit into your mind in some way? Like, even Doug in the book, he said that he doesn't think that he sang as well as people think he did on Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, because he was singing to make a great album instead of singing how he really felt. So when I read that, I thought, oh my God, like there's another version of Gretchen Goes to Nebraska that I haven't heard.
Yeah.
but I like what you're saying about them coming to peace with the journey and still journeying. But
I just can't imagine them being anything other than what they are.
well,
Like
you can't?
No.
You're a very imaginative person. You can't imagine that they're anything. So okay, what I'm doing is I'm not being
Yeah,
kind here.
I know.
How about I just ask you, what do you mean?
Yeah. Yeah. What, you can't imagine Doug as a bus driver or a captain of industry?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Hold on. I can.
You can't imagine them any differently than they are. So what do you mean by that?
As a fan of the band, I'm just so grateful that their music continues to sort of chart a voyage of self-discovery and self-expression that just seems so in touch with a journey that I sympathize with and
I'm
so,
right there with you.
So I guess what I'm saying is I'm really glad for that, and I'm kind of glad that that's still there for me, for them as a band. Now, they may have wanted to be in a different place by now, or
Right.
they may have preferred a few less knocks about.
Right.
I think when it's like when you say, I'll go through everything I went through to get, in the past, all the bad stuff just to be right here with now, because I love where I'm at now. Yeah, okay, we get it. But, maybe I wouldn't have wanted to have that one thing happen,
Right. Well, one of the moments that Jerry Gaskill talked about was that when they were, I think it was when they were recording, or it was either when they were recording Out of the Silent Planet or when before they were going to record Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, he woke up one morning and there was a lump in his armpit. And he showed it to Taylor.
Yeah.
And he said, you got to go to the hospital right now. And it was Hodgkin's.
Yeah.
And he survived that.
Yeah.
And then he made some joking comment about, and a few heart attacks. And,
Yeah.
And then after that, Doug talks about how impressed he is by how Jerry has looked at these moments.
Yeah.
And just pressed on through them with a little bit of humor. And I think part of what you're talking about is I feel comfortable admitting to it as well, is I'm glad they're the way they are for me.
Yeah.
And the big one is Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, like no question. I mean, I've listened to their other albums and there's some really nice stuff on them, but there is something about Gretchen Goes to Nebraska that just stands out in their canon, but also stands out in that era.
Yeah.
And there's something about 88, 89, and 90, the albums that were coming out in hard rock and metal.
Dude.
Dimension Hatros from Voivod, Nothing Face was their follow-up. You've got Living Color comes out.
Soundgarden.
Seventh Son came out
Jane's
at that
Addiction.
time. Yes.
You
like
know.
there was just an amazing array of stuff. And I'm not gonna put this in a temporal sense, but it's really interesting to think about standing out when everything sounds the same versus standing out when everything sounds so different.
Yeah.
And I think from our conversation that we're both in agreement that this album really stands out.
Yeah, I think we would encourage everyone to listen to this album, or listen to the first 3 albums. Listen to them all, but this album, a very, very special album, I think, for both of us. And
and one that is surprisingly calming, even though it's very heavy. It's got this weight, and it's got this great height of expression. It's very soothing.
Yeah.
Very soothing album.
And stay tuned for, if you're not a Patreon member and you don't have access to the Aftercast, consider it because we will be recording an Aftercast as soon as this discussion wraps, of which I will tell a story of my journey. I'm just going to say up a hill with this album.
I've been waiting for a week to hear this story.
Yeah. You don't want to miss that one.
It was great talking to you.
Wow,
Rob.
Joël. Yeah, it was awesome. And we're going to keep going. But because there's so much more we could say.
And we will.
And we will say.
Yeah.
And that's what's great about any musical discussion. You just keep having them.
Goes on and on and on.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Cheers.